Welcome back to the Inside Nebraska Recruiting Blitz podcast. Once again, I'm joined by Inside Nebraska's own Steve Marik. Steve, how are we doing?
I'm doing awesome. How are you, Tim?
Not too bad, not too bad. We're here. It's been a busy month. Look, we've talked about this at this point. It's a busy month for Nebraska. We're in the midst of everything. Things are changing pretty much every single day. I feel like every day I get a text from a new source or a new person. Just hey, this happened, this happened. It's that time of the year. Busiest time
Yeah.
of the year for Nebraska. Coming off a big official visit weekend, Nebraska held two camps as well this weekend. But to start things off, obviously, talking about that official visit weekend, Nebraska ended that weekend picking up a big commitment from Hitchcock defensive lineman Malcolm Simpson. Simpson's a guy I've seen a couple of times. I went and saw him out in the fall back when I was in Texas. I saw him again in the spring, right before I moved up here to Nebraska at the Houston Under Armour camp. A really powerful defensive lineman, good hands, good usage of his hands, really athletic. You go watch his
hmm
film. You see an athletic lineman. You go watch his basketball tape. It's a
hmm
6'4", 250, 260-pound defensive lineman that's like soaring above the rim and dunking. And on the defensive side of the ball is like, making blocks off the glass and stuff. Just freaky athletic. A little underrated, talking to insiders in Texas, talking to people in the know. There was some between transferring schools between his junior and senior year, and he missed some time as a junior. Kind of there were some big schools like Oklahoma and Texas and LSU and a couple of those programs. A&M we're all monitoring him, but hadn't really offered him. But this is one of those. Nebraska offered him last month, got him to visit this month. The visit went extremely well. He really enjoyed his time with Coach Knight and really enjoyed his time with Coach Rule. Just really enjoyed the Lincoln atmosphere, and it ends in a commitment. Nebraska picks up their second defensive line commit in the 2025 class in Simpson, and they had some help from the other defensive line commit, Tyson Terry, who we stated was peer recruiting him, and Tyson kind of fell in love with his tape. Those two really gelled, and it went really well. And Steve, on your end, kind of you've seen the tape. You had an idea of who Malcolm is as a player. Kind of where do you think he fits in on this D line, and kind of what have you liked from the tape?
Yeah, you ask where does he fit in? Everywhere, right? I think he's a really versatile dude. You mentioned 6'4", 240, rivals listed him at, but he's not 240. As you mentioned him on our insiders board, he's probably closer to 260 right now. When I watch him, he can play defensive end. He can play that zero tech right on the head of right on the head of the center. He can play a little three tech too. So just I think he's just a prototypical Nebraska defensive line recruit that you're going to bring him in and expect him to play different techniques across the line of scrimmage. And Terrence Knighton is going to be looking for those guys. Tony White's going to be looking for those guys. A real aggressive gap shooting type defensive lineman. Kind of, when I watch him, I think at the size that he's at right now, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Cam Lenhart on Nebraska's defensive line, and so that got me excited. I just I like you said, Tim, he looks like a powerful guy that once he gets in the program and gets a season or two of weightlifting, of the nutrition plan at Nebraska, he's going to turn into a really interesting defensive lineman who I think fits the scheme perfectly. I keep going back to fit. I think it's a really good fit with Malcolm Simpson in this three front defense that Nebraska finds itself running. So, yeah, I think it's a great pickup. Like you said, maybe being slept on a little bit. But again, I think he found a really good program that kind of fits his style of play. And, once he gets a season or two in the weight room and nutrition program, he's going to be a really intriguing player to keep an eye on.
Totally agree. And I kind of touched on it in his commitment story, at least his analysis story. Nebraska's they've talked about it offensively, trying to move to a positionless kind of offense. But
Mm-hmm.
you look at what the bodies they're recruiting defensively, the type of players they're recruiting defensively, they're
Yeah.
really moving for positionless on both sides of the ball. They want guys that are interchangeable at all three levels. You look at the defensive line, like Tyson Terry and Malcolm Simpson. Those guys can play defensive end, down the
Mm-hmm.
line could eventually play, nose. And Malcolm, something you see on his film, which you don't really see from a guy his size.
Yeah.
Galveston Ball, he's playing nose. That's
Right over
really
the center.
impressive.
Yeah.
Like right over the center, like has no issues taking on two blocks.
Mm-hmm.
Handles those guys. And again, those are Houston kind of undersized defensive linemen. So Houston ISD undersized defensive or offensive lineman he's going up against. But still, that's he's a good player, and this is a
Hmm.
guy that, is interchangeable. It sounds like Nebraska's plan for him is for him to be interchangeable as well.
Yeah.
Um, and he's got that power, that strength, and just the techniques he's had to use to beat double teams at the high school level will translate to college, even if he is going up against, somewhat undersized offensive linemen. Really impressed kind of with how fast this turned around for Nebraska. This wasn't,
Oh yeah.
like we said, he's very slept on, but at the same time, this
Hmm.
wasn't a recruitment that wasn't without competition. Texas Tech has been in this for over a year. Texas Tech
They
hosted
offered, yeah, Tech offered January of 2023. And so they've been on him since January of 2023. Then Nebraska comes in, Terrence Knighton comes in, offers him less than a month ago, May 20th, after a camp, and they get his commitment. So I think it really says a lot about again the fit that Nebraska's defense has with somebody like Malcolm Simpson. And then also I was kind of thinking about this too. A young guy coming out of Texas defensive line. I know Principal Uman Mielen is playing jack linebacker, that kind of hybrid defensive end outside linebacker role in Tony White's defense, but that's got to help too, where Terrence Knighton can come down to Texas. He can talk with Malcolm Simpson and talk to him and tell him about, hey, we have this guy right out of Texas, just like you. He came in and showed out in practice, and he earned his way onto the game as a true freshman. I see the same thing with you. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Malcolm Simpson, it's a little different with defensive linemen, but Cam Lenhart did it last year too. Riley Van Poppel, another Texas guy, came in and for the fall camp. He was a summer enrollee and earned his way onto the field as a true freshman as well. So Malcolm Simpson can look at guys like Riley Van Poppel. He can look at guys like Cam Lenhart and especially Principal Uman Mielen. That yeah, it is possible if I do well, they're going to play me. It's not just they're not going to play me because I'm a true freshman and I need to like earn my dues. Like, no way. If you can play, Matt Rule's going to play you.
Yep. And, funny you mentioned, Van Poppel and Prince. Well, both those guys, coming out of high school as well. It was the exact same thing as Malcolm. Like, talking to insiders and people around Texas that have watched these guys play, it's like I remember, when Prince was coming out of high school, it's like, hey, why isn't anyone picking up on his
Yeah.
recruit? Like, go watch the tape. This is a really twitchy edge rusher, like really
Mm-hmm.
fast, really physical, really twitchy. Why aren't more schools involved here? Nebraska obviously got him on campus, and he contributed early and was a really good contributor early. Same thing with Van Poppel. That was a guy that no one really knew kind of what he'd look like at the next level. Nebraska had a vision for him, brought him in. They both saw on both sides, the coaching staff and Van Poppel saw through that vision. And, it's kind of just the start for him. Like this is kind of just,
Yeah.
this is the start for him, it feels like. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to that fit thing with Van Poppel too. He's the guy that I think is like future team captain or in rules program, future single digit guy all day long. I think that highly of Riley Van Poppel and what he's going to do at his career at Nebraska.
Completely agree. Moving on to the rest of this official visit weekend, just touching on some of the notable guys in town. Obviously, in-state linebacker, four-star linebacker Christian Jones was in town. We kind of touched on this last week, kind of circling back on that again. Nebraska's done pretty much as they can do here. This is it. There's nothing more that Nebraska can show to
Yeah,
him.
what else is
Nothing
there left to
more.
do?
There's nothing left to do at this point, and I noted it in my intel coming out of the weekend. At this point, it's up to Christian at this point to kind of decide, do I want to stay home? Do I want to play for the team I was raised following, for the team that, has been here, the team that, I've been recruited by the longest? Or do I want to explore SEC options? Do I want to explore West Coast options? Do I want to explore, some options in the South? Like, I think at this point, it really is, there's nothing more Nebraska can do. They've done as much as they can. They've shown him everything they can. He has a path to playing time. They are working to kind of build this linebacker group, to build one of the better linebacker rooms in the Big Ten. So he'll be surrounded by talent. They've pitched all that to him. They've done everything they can. Spencer, he's a big, his dad's a weightlifter. He takes a lot of pride in weightlifting. He spent a lot of time with the strength and conditioning program and the strength and conditioning coaches this weekend. But that's the whole thing. At this point, it's up to Christian. And we could see an announcement sometime soon. But he's taking this he's playing this process, a very fluid process with him. This is one of those guys that this could go all the way through the fall. This could end this summer. Just one of those things. We're all kind of in wait and see mode regarding Christian Jones. Um, just coming out of the weekend as well, another one. Just we wanted to pass along here. Oregon 4-star wide receiver commit Isaiah Mozee did make it into town for an official visit. Mozee from Lee Summit North in Missouri. Has visited Nebraska a couple of times. You know, I mentioned it on the board when we posted this visit was coming. He quietly snuck into Nebraska in April, like right before he committed to Oregon. A visit that kind of went under a lot of people's radar.
Everything about him is quiet. It's
Yep.
kind of hard to pin down this kid.
Oh yeah, very, very quiet. And he knows what he's doing. You know, the way he's
Oh,
handling
yeah,
recruit
I
process.
respect it.
Obviously his father was the head coach at Lee Summit. And now his father's, you know, on staff at UCF. A note there on UCF, he did make a visit to UCF earlier this summer, but you know, as far as people I've talked to and kind of sources close to that situation, you know, they're not expecting Isaiah to follow his dad necessarily, you know, in the same way that Nebraska's trying to flip him from Oregon. You know, UCF is obviously trying, but UCF will have to prove themselves, you know, in the same way that any other program would. They don't have any special privilege or any special, you know, there's nothing special there just because his dad is on staff there, if that makes sense. But just want to note, you know, he made it into town. He's a kid that is kept a lot of things very close to vest. You know, like you're not going to hear a whole lot of intel coming out of the weekend in terms of how the visit went, but just the fact that Nebraska got him in town despite his commitment to another Big Ten program, that Oregon too has just had some success in Kansas City. And the fact that Nebraska's had him on campus as much as they have this spring is very notable and something to just keep an eye on. You know, like wide receiver recruiting is a big question right now. People are wondering, you know, when's that going to get figured out? I've maintained, I think if Nebraska accomplishes what they need to accomplish in the fall, wide receiver recruiting is going to take care of itself. But Mozee in particular, just good to see him back on Nebraska's radar in terms of this is a guy that Nebraska is still pursuing. You know, it's not just because he committed to Oregon doesn't mean that Nebraska has slowed down that pursuit at all. Another just quick note from the visit weekend, Kade Pietrzak, you know, another one that is extremely tough to get a hold of. He has not done a single interview in his entire high school career, I believe. At least not a recruiting interview. You know, he just hasn't. He's kept things quiet, kept things close to vest. But we have good sourcing here, and we've maintained good sourcing here that Oklahoma is the school to beat. You know, Nebraska had him on campus for an official visit this weekend. He'll go to Kansas State next weekend, but at this point, I think the gap that Oklahoma, or the separation that Oklahoma's created over the course of the last couple of months, you know, this is one that Brent Venables himself has personally taken a handle on. You know, Venables really wants him, and that's played a factor, you know, and so I think this is one that is ultimately going to end up going Oklahoma's way, but Nebraska did have him on campus. You know, the visit went relatively well as far as what I've heard, you know, as well as it can go considering this feels like one that's all but wrapped up, if that makes sense. So just wanted to note that kind of coming out of the weekend. We'll have more intel coming out of the visit weekend throughout the week over at Inside Nebraska. Be sure to tune in. And while we're at it, you know, be sure to like and subscribe here, like and subscribe this video. Yeah, Steve, you know, we'll kind of move on, kind of look ahead to before we do that, I guess let's touch on one quick development from the weekend as well. Nebraska made their first in-state 2026 camp offer, at least for this summer. Elkhorn North linebacker Jase Reynolds picked up that offer Friday after a positive Friday Night Lights camp. I talked to him on Sunday morning, just kind of caught up with him on the offer, caught up with him on, you know, what it felt like to get that offer. And, you know, he's a Nebraska native, born and raised Nebraska fan. You know, his whole family supports the program. So they were obviously very excited, you know, ecstatic to land that offer. You know, his family was excited. His teammates were excited. Just an exciting thing for him. He said he's still kind of processing it. You know, he hasn't even like discussed like potentially setting up a return visit, but he did note, you know, he plans to be back in Nebraska at least a couple of times in the fall. You know, obviously, you know, it's not a far drive for him, a little more than an hour kind of from Elkhorn to Nebraska. So shouldn't have any issue getting back on campus. Steve, you know, watching his film, what do you think of him?
Yeah, so Jase Reynolds, 6'2", around 190 pounds. He reports a 4.5 in the 40-yard dash. Broad jumps a little under 10 feet. You know, watching his huddle highlights, 57 tackles last year, I should say, at Elkhorn now North. I liked what I kind of saw from him in space. You know, he plays that outside linebacker slash safety kind of hybrid. Maybe it looked to me in Elkhorn South's defense, and he was playing out in space, covering slot receivers really well, setting the edge against the run game. I could definitely see, you know, why Nebraska would be intrigued, because he looks like a really solid tackler. He kind of reminded me a little bit of like a Luke Reimer from back in the day at Lincoln North Star. I think Luke was a North Star guy
North Star.
after his Kansas 8-man days, that is. But yeah, so 6'2", 190, you know, looking down the road, just let's just hypothetically say he ends up a Husker, add 10 pounds on him, 15 pounds on him, and you have like a 6'2", 210, 215 pound, you know, good tackler out in space who can do a little running too, 4.5 40, like I said. So, you know what, I see the potential in this. And again, you know, it sounds like he bleeds red, scarlet and cream. He's a Husker fan. This would be he's just another really good in-state athlete that seems to be popping up in this state like more often, every single recruiting cycle. So, you know what, he obviously killed it at the camp, enough to earn that scholarship offer. Took a nice picture with Rob Dvorak. So yeah, I think that there's plenty of things to like there with Jase Reynolds. Tim, what did you think about him?
Really like him. And when I was talking to him, kind of, I like to ask players, you know, kind of, what do you think your strengths are? You know, kind of get a gauge on their end, what they believe their strengths and weaknesses are. And he immediately touched on his versatility and kind of touched on, he plays a bunch of different positions at Elkhorn North. You know, offensive side of the ball, he plays a little quarterback, plays a little receiver. Defensive side of the ball, like you mentioned, you know, some linebacker and like edge rusher, some
A little bit of safety in there.
Yeah, a little bit of safety as well, you know, so he can kind of
close your eyes, fire up the imagination. He's a rover in Tony White's 3-3-5,
yeah.
right?
And I was just about to mention that, you know, like it's hard to look at his frame, look at his film, and like I watched that and I'm like, you know, this Isaac Gifford, like question mark, you know, like this is kind of what that looks like. You know, they love Isaac Gifford in this defense. They're looking for a replacement there, you know, if this one last year for him. This is one that could potentially fill that role. And you know, this also continue. You know, Nebraska's had a lot of success, not a success necessarily, I guess that's not the best way to put it, but Nebraska's produced, the state as a whole, produced some good linebackers recently. And this is another one that's kind of coming up. Obviously now has a big P4 offer from Nebraska. Should continue to get some offers. You know, this is one I'm curious to kind of see, you know, does he let the process play out? He's a guy that I think deserves some national offers, should get some national recognition. You see guys in state sometimes, Pierce Newberry, for example, you know, like they never really blow up beyond the region. You know, they get those 4 or 5 offers from the regional schools, and they never really blow up beyond there. And then they quickly shut down their recruitment, commit to one of those programs, and that's just it. And you know, their offer list doesn't necessarily reflect their talent. So with Jase, I'm just curious to see, you know, is he willing to wait this out? Is he willing to talk to other schools, engage with other programs, try and get some of those national offers? Or is this one that, you know, could turn around quickly for Nebraska? Just something I'm interested to see over these next few weeks. Yeah, you know, excited to see him in the fall. You know, I'm now definitely going out to go see Elkhorn North this fall. So excited to see him in action on both sides of the ball. Turning our attention to next week, June 21st through the 23rd, Nebraska's hosting another big official visit weekend, the last one of June. After this coming weekend, all programs go back into a dead period. At the end of June, going into July, most of July, and then that last weekend of July, Nebraska is going to have another chance to host some visitors. You know, they usually do it up a big junior day. That'll probably be a big recruiting weekend for them to kind of kick off the start of fall camp. So just wanted to touch on a couple of names expected in town for that June 21st weekend. One big one, of most of the commits are expected in town. You know, this Nebraska had a couple commits in town this past weekend. Connor Booth, Bear Tenney, and Bryson Hayes were the 3 that made it in this past weekend. Doing some peer recruiting, but also, you know, getting that official visit weekend for them, official visit experience for themselves. You know, I saw a question last week, you know, what's the difference between an official visit and an unofficial visit for these guys? You know, for someone like Christian Jones, who's been on campus as many times as he has, you know, what's an official visit for him? An official visit is completely covered by the school. From the moment the travel from their home, wherever that is, the travel from home to campus and back is covered by the university. And then while they're on campus, lodging is provided by the university. You stay at a really nice hotel. They eat really good food. You talk to guys. What do they look forward to on the official visit weekends? It's always the food. No matter where they're going, it's just they get a lot of really good meals over the course of a weekend, eat a lot of food. All of them by the end of it are just like, I've eaten too much food. Every single one of them eats too much food on these trips.
I always like hearing about the tomahawk steaks that they all put down, like the $60 cuts or more, $80. I don't know what it is, but those tomahawk steaks apparently are a big all the rage.
Oh yeah, steak, lobster, all of that. It's so it's that experience, and then on top of that, it's spending a lot of on an unofficial visit. They're in and out of town. Like there's not necessarily a dedicated schedule for them, but on an official visit, there's a full schedule that they're kind of adhering to, them and their families. They get individual meeting times with their position coaches. They get an individual meeting with Matt Rule. They get all of that, and that's really important for these guys to make decisions. This is essentially like that final, like I said, this is like when I touched on with Christian Jones, like when I said this is all Nebraska showing them everything, like they have nothing left to show. This was all that was left for him, was an official visit experience at Nebraska. He's had that now. He can't have it. You can't do 2 official visits to the same school. There's not going to be another official visit to Nebraska for him. So, or anybody, anyone who's already visited, obviously. So, just wanted to answer that question real quick of what these official visits look like. So again, for these commits, this is also an experience for them. This is something that they look forward to their whole recruitment, is those official visits they get to take as seniors. So even though they're committed, Nebraska still has to like make sure they keep up and make sure those guys feel like priorities the entire weekend. So 3 came in last weekend. Pretty much the rest of the class, I believe, is expected June 21st. One big exception is Tyson Terry. No cause for concern there. He just the people he wants to bring with him for his official visit. The dates didn't really line up. He's hoping to do that in the fall rather than do it in June. But he could sneak into town just to help peer recruit. He's done that already. He could do that again. Again, no reason for concern there. It's just he won't be of the commits in town. He won't be on that list. One commit just wanted to touch on real quick. Jamarion Parker's back in town for the first time since committing to Nebraska. This is one that, there's been some speculation like, hey, is this Nebraska going to be able to hold on to him? Is Nebraska, obviously he just committed, he just committed this month. But there's already speculation of, the guys, players from Ritter have transferred before, players from Ritter have flipped before, there's kind of just that, helmet scouting, essentially. It's the same thing of just like, I wouldn't necessarily worry about that right now. As long as EJ Bartell is at Nebraska, as long as Keith Williams is at Nebraska, I think those 2 relationships are 2 of the strongest he's built in his recruitment. As long as those 2 guys are at Nebraska, I don't think Nebraska has a whole lot to worry about, again, unless a program comes in with an extremely strong offer, which at this point, I'm not sure what that would look like for him, because he's a relationships guy. He sees the path to playing time at Nebraska. He sees the path to contribute. He understands too with the way Nebraska works, like if he takes care of business on the field, he'd be taken care of, from the NIL standpoint as well. So there isn't anything to worry about on that standpoint for right now. But again, notable that he's back in town for the first time. As far as uncommitted guys in town, 2 big ones: Houston Kaahaaina-Torres coming in from Hawaii. This has been one of Nebraska's top interior targets for some time. Obviously they're after that trio of guys from Bishop Gorman, Douglas Utu, SJ Fetuli, and Ale Kale. That last name has been one that is.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, that's been one, and those guys, but Houston is been on Nebraska's radar, a top target for Nebraska longer than those Bishop Gorman guys have. Nebraska kind of found their way into those Bishop Gorman recruitments heavier the spring. They had them on campus in the fall, found themselves heavier in the spring. But Houston's been one that's been at the top of the board for them since, dating back to like January, December, maybe even longer, at this point. And that's a guy that, they'd love to have in the class. He's the number 3 center in the country. They'd love to just have him basically be the Ben Scott replacement. They're working some guys in, currently on the roster to behind Ben. But Houston's a guy that they kind of see coming in, sliding in, like we talked about with Preston Tuamu last week, a guy that could come in from high school ready to play
Yeah.
pretty much from day one. So this is a big weekend for him. One, I would say, if he has another good visit to Nebraska, could potentially move quickly for the Huskers. And then another
And
one.
the connection there with Houston, Donovan Raiola played at high school, which is near where Houston plays. And there was a connection too. I talked to Houston in February for a recruiting story. And, we just talked about playing center. Nebraska is kind of looking at him at center right now, but, he can obviously play other positions along the offensive line. But yeah, that connection with Donovan Raiola to the Hawaiian Islands, that's coming up big again. And, I think Nebraska is doing a good thing of dipping their toes in there in the recruiting waters and kind of planting their flag of like, hey, this is a legit program again. And we want to recruit the kids out in Hawaii and everything. And I talked to Houston about playing center, and he had a really good quote here that I pulled up that I really kind of appreciated when he said it. Houston said, "I love watching and observing the game from the middle. Everybody relies on me, so I feel like it's my responsibility to call out our plays the best I can to make sure we all move forward on the field." I just thought that was kind of like a leader thing to say from Houston. And when I look at him and I kind of see how he just goes about things and talking to him and just kind of with everything with the interview process and watching him play the game, it just kind of, the kid strikes me as like a leader, like a future leader, like somebody that I'd be okay with like going into battle with. So that's my 2 cents on Houston.
For sure. And, kind of matches, what they have in Ben Scott right now, a guy that is kind of
Oh yeah,
somewhat of a quiet leader
that's
of
him.
that offensive line room, kind of sets the tone for everybody. Houston's kind of built the exact same way, in
Yeah.
terms of mentality. So, curious to see how this visit weekend goes for him. That's a big one, on the docket. Another one, in-state 4-star tight end, Chase Loftin will be back in town, for his official visit. He's coming off official visits to Florida State and Texas A&M this
A&M.
weekend. I'd keep an eye on Texas A&M. I've
Oh
kind of
yeah.
maintained that for the last couple of weeks now. I think Nebraska kind of understands where they sit with him. Nebraska also understands that they can win him, but at the same time, I think as Chase is kind of blown up into this national level recruit, he's actually interested in exploring these other options. He's truly doing his research on these national options. And, Texas A&M, took Christian Ellsworth from Nebraska. They have him basically
I was
coaching.
just gonna mention Christian. Yeah, Ellsworth.
They've
Yep.
got Ellsworth working there, and they've got Colin Klein. Colin Klein is
Yeah.
was formerly Kansas State's offensive coordinator, was formerly Chase's older brother, Braden. Braden is at Kansas State, so there's
Yep.
that relationship as well. So Colin Klein, Christian Ellsworth, they have Texas A&M legitimately in this recruitment. Nebraska's going to look to impress this weekend and try and get him. Despite the tight end board, despite the tight end room, they really want Loftin, but they are facing real competition from both Florida State and Texas A&M. And I've got a close eye on Texas A&M. Beyond those two, I think there's some other Texas ties he's got. He understands, playing in the cold isn't necessarily fun. We've kind of talked about that, me and him. And he's mentioned that to me. And, at Texas A&M, never really play in the cold. The coldest you get is like 40, 50 degrees. You don't really play in
Yep.
the cold like that, unless it's a bowl game, unless you have to go up north. So Florida State's the same way, doesn't really have to play in the cold over there, unless you're traveling up to Boston College for an away game. You're not really playing in the cold over there either. So something to keep an eye on. Just I'm curious to see what Nebraska does with him this weekend. I think Nebraska's got a chance to potentially shut the door on these other two schools with a positive official visit. He would love to stay in state. I think that was an option he was very seriously considering prior to exploding onto the national radar the way he has. Was Nebraska was far and away the favorite. Now that gap's closed a little bit, but that's not to say that Nebraska isn't still legitimately in this. It's just it's a competition now. And one more I just wanted to touch on of the guys that are in town. Rahim Hutchins is back in town. He's down to a top two of Memphis and Nebraska. Rahim's a guy that even on Rivals right now, we don't have a ranking on him. I'm working to get that change. I'm working to, talk to our rankings people on, getting him a grade. this is a diamond in the rough for Nebraska, in my honest opinion. This is a guy that Nebraska, you watch his film, it's very limited. He plays at a powerhouse school in Houston called Shadow Creek. They have a couple 4-star receivers on the roster right now. Ja'Cory Watson's headed to Houston. That's an in-state guy.
So he was Braylon Prude's
Braylon
teammate.
Prude's teammate.
Yeah.
And like Braylon Prude, a guy that is
Yeah.
somewhat buried on the depth chart, compared to some higher ranked guys, or guys that have some offers, have a little more, for example, Prude, was behind a linebacker, Anthony Williams, that has some length, has some stuff, but like Prude kind of worked into that rotation. On the flip side of that coin, with Rahim, he's behind 2026 4-star receiver Chris Stewart, a really shifty, fast receiver with some good size, more capable size. Ja'Cory Watson, like I mentioned, another versatile kind of wide receiver. But Rahim's right there, man. He's that third, fourth receiver for them. And you watch his film, he just explodes off the line, inside and out of breaks. He's really smooth, really, really twitchy. Electric athlete, really electric athlete. I think he's in for a big, big senior year, kind of burst on the radar, jumped on the radar as a junior, even with, limited production, limited film. It's not hard to see why Nebraska likes his route running ability, kind of likes the developmental upside he's got. And so again, despite his limited offer list, despite the fact that this is coming down to Nebraska and Memphis, despite the fact that, he's currently unranked, I wouldn't necessarily look at Rahim as like, they call it bread, kind of just guys to fill the class. This isn't a bread type of player. This is a guy that can come on campus and can contribute. I watch, the way I watch his film, he's shorter. He's not the same size. But you watch his film, and I draw some comps to Ja'Cory Barney. You wonder, if he plays at a school like where Barney plays at, where he has an opportunity to potentially contribute at multiple positions and isn't necessarily stuffed on the depth chart because of, the talent around him. What type of contributions does he make? So Rahim's a guy that I'm very curious to see kind of how this weekend goes. Whether or not where Nebraska kind of sits with their receiver board, kind of how they see him fit in the receiver room, and whether or not he has the green light to potentially pull the trigger. But
with Hutchins, what I like, just looking at his stats right here, and this is according to Max Preps, 17 catches, 378 yards, and what I like the most, 5 touchdowns. So he only 17 catches on the season, but 5 of them were for scores. So that's pretty cool.
For sure. And yeah, another thing I should note with the Shadow Creek as well, last year they had a kind of a shaky quarterback situation. The aforementioned Ja'Cory Watson, he was playing quarterback a little bit for them to start the year. Then over the course of the year, they moved 4-star cornerback Kobe Sellers. He's a cornerback for them, going to Texas A&M, but he played quarterback for them down the stretch last year. That was just kind of how weird the quarterback situation worked. They did get a quarterback to now in the program. They have his name's Joseph Stewart, kind of transferred in this offseason to go play for them. So they have a real quarterback now. And hopefully that means, more production for Rahim, will be also stepping into a bigger role this fall. And outside of that, it's another group of official visitors coming in. We've got about, as of right now, the count is 11. 2 notable omissions from the list that are no longer going to make it in town. 4-star edge rusher or 4-star defensive lineman Jalen Williams committed to Michigan last week and was expected to be at Nebraska for an official visit June 21st. Obviously, he's no longer making it in. Michigan kind of won that recruitment, kind of locked him in. That one's over. Nebraska might continue to work there. We'll continue to reach out, see if, there's any type of opening for them to get back involved, because this is a player they really, really love to add to the defensive line room. But as far as I've heard, I think that door is closed right now. So it makes that Simpson commitment all the more bigger. Another one that won't make it in-state tight end, Reiman Zebert, committed to Stanford last week. He will also no longer make it into Nebraska for an official visit. He's shut down his recruitment. He's headed to the Cardinal. And, I mentioned it on the board kind of when this commitment happened. It's kind of the best thing for both sides at this point, kind of where Nebraska's tight end room sits. They're still after Chase Loftin. And on the other side of that with Zebra too, kind of would need some development as well. And the path to playing time at Stanford is a little more open. He's an high academic kid, obviously, came down to Stanford and Duke for him, high academics. And those are, a lot of kids would dream to have those 2 offers, much less, opportunities to go to school at those 2 places, not just play football. So the fact that he's headed there to play football, it's a great thing for him. It's a great thing for his family. That door's open. Nebraska did everything right by him. He was just honored by the fact that Nebraska was one of his first offers. The fact that Nebraska took a chance on him, that genuinely did mean a lot to him. He grew up a Nebraska fan. So, Nebraska's maintained a positive relationship there, even though he's committed elsewhere. So, down the line, if something happens, he finds himself in the transfer portal, Nebraska's interested,
Yep.
the story between these two sides might not be done. Like I don't necessarily think that the door is permanently closed, even with Zebert going somewhere else. But just wanted to touch on that to close things out. We'll have updates on this visit weekend, or this upcoming visit weekend, and this past visit weekend throughout the weekend inside Nebraska. Stay tuned. Like last week, the visit weekend changed between when we recorded and by Friday. It kind of changed drastically. Same thing could happen this week. We'll keep you up to date on everything that's happening at Inside Nebraska. Be sure to like and subscribe this video. Follow our work at Inside Nebraska. Steve, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
No, not really. Just keep it here locked on Inside Nebraska. It's the June recruiting stuff is almost done, but not yet. So we're going hard.
Yep. And that'll do it for us. Appreciate y'all tuning in, and we'll be back with another episode next week.